Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar, Measuring Success, Metrics, Outcomes, and Best Practices. I am Ann Ting, the Senior Vice President of Marketing at Totango, and with me I have Kevin O'Kane, who's the Senior Vice President of Customer Success here at Totango. Thank you for joining. I know we still have some people coming in, but we thought we'd get started since we have a lot of content to get through. But before we get started, I wanted to just share a few housekeeping items. First of all, I want to let you know that the webinar will be recorded. It's being recorded right now, and the link will be sent out to you within the next 24 hours with an email. For any of your members of your team who's not able to join today, feel free to forward that to them so they can also listen in. All attendees are currently in listen-only mode, but we definitely welcome any questions that you have, so feel free to start submitting those in the Q&A button down at the bottom of your webinar window, and we will get to those towards the end and get through them, as many of them as we can. So today, what we'll be talking about are, at a high level, some of the customer goals for customer success, but then dive into the metrics, architecture, and the business outcome supply chain to enable success for your organization. But success and metrics are not enough. So understanding kind of what is the right level of information for the right roles and the right visibility. So whether that's the C-suite or the head of your organization or a partner for your customer success, like the product team or support or sales, or even for yourself as you're monitoring the day-to-day health of your portfolio of customers. What are the metrics you need for that level of role and information? And then establishing the appropriate management cadence, making sure that as an organization, that goal alignment and outcomes orientation is part of the DNA of your enterprise. Before we start talking about measuring success, we need to define what is success. Measuring success can be different depending on the organization or your function. Businesses operate on systems, so aligning on the right metrics, the right measurement system, and enabling that workflow that transform that intention into outcomes that you want to achieve is critically important. For sales, as an example, that could be around customer acquisition and your CRM workflow. For customer service, that could be customer support metrics and that workflow, customer satisfaction and loyalty, that could be sentiment and your experience management workflow. But customer success is specifically how an organization delivers on the vision and the promise of customer lifetime value. And while your organization could have many specific strategic goals for customer success, those that are thinking of implementing customer success or the customer success team, we typically see these three goals: increasing organic growth, increasing customer centricity, or improving margin and efficiency. While you can acquire new accounts or new companies to increase your revenue stream, customer success really powers organic growth for your organization. Your customers are looking to realize their value from the products and services that they have acquired from you. And by providing a proactive and consistent and relevant engagement model that helps them realize that value, improves their experience, that's what builds loyalty and improves retention. And that lays the foundation for increasing cross-sell or upsell, and even fueling new acquisition growth models, whether it's in the form of existing logos and new products or new departments. So that could be selling outside of renewals, or in acquiring new customers or from new logos and new products through a formal customer advocacy program. In addition to increasing customer growth, increasing customer centricity is a key part of customer success. And that means making sure that your entire organization puts customers at the center of what we do. So reducing friction, not just for the customer success teams, but at an entire company level, enabling that the entire company becomes more customer-centered. CS is not just a tool that's for the customer success teams. It's really the only area that ignites the entire organization to focus on the customer and the customer value. Now, today we'll be talking about metrics that will drive increased accountability for execution, and just as important, increasing execution speed and your market responsiveness. So what's that time to value that you're measuring for you and your customers, from that first value after onboarding to continued speed and agility to deliver new innovations, new services, and new ways of engaging with your customers to deliver value for them. So ultimately, what you're able to do is to differentiate not just on your products and services, but on experience and on outcomes. And lastly, improving margin efficiency. Increasing customer lifetime value requires driving higher net revenue retention without proportionally increasing the operating costs. If you're covering every single revenue activity with a sales model that's absent of customer success, you're probably spending a lot of money, because having customer success and doing it well, it's your most cost-efficient growth model. At the last webinar we hosted at the end of August, we spoke about scale and productivity. Now, increasing your ability to operate and perform efficiently across segments, from your high touch segment all the way to high volume segments through technology automation, increasing that ARR to CSM ratio, and broadening both your account as well as your portfolio coverage. This will enable you to drive higher growth as well as margin improvement. If you didn't have a chance to attend our webinar last time, please take a look at a recording there to talk about this specific point. But these all in turn will help you optimize costs for your outcomes, whether that's CAC, your customer acquisition cost, or your customer expansion cost, or even your customer retention renewal cost. So clearly, customer success is the customer-centered growth strategy that drives maximized customer lifetime value and is the driver for growth of your company. But in order to achieve that, there are some very core essential capabilities that need to be in place to enable this measurement system and an operating model to realize that growth. For example, one must have capabilities having a digital view of your customer. This requires having a broad perspective, a complete perspective of everything that's affecting your customer, that relationship that you have with the customer. It could come in the form of the opportunity management, the account, the support tickets, the product usage, the utilization. This requires lots and lots of data and a holistic view of the data, but it's a necessity to creating the insights that's needed for you to take action on them. Secondly, designing your operating model for flow. High velocity, low friction. Opening up additional channels and removing all those roadblocks in your processes. Ultimately, standardization is a key here, right? So that you can consistently deliver on your outcomes and deliver the same outcome, the same kind, the same way all the time. And this goes back to our earlier point about scale and allowing you to grow your programs with scale. Reducing friction with a clear orchestration model and iterating rapidly. You have to bias towards proactive motions and capabilities in your programs. Establish that reactive model, yes, but better yet, build in an early warning system that monitors, detects risks, allows you to classify and intervene as needed to take action. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. How do you move from reactive processes to proactive process? But when you put in your orchestration model first place, things are going to change, right? Change is a new normal now in the world today. The market might change, your customers might change, competition might change, and even your organization might change. So you need to design your systems for iteration and rapid execution and innovation so that you can improve on the speed at which you continue to roll out those new capabilities and new ways to deliver value for your customers. Leveraging the full power of your enterprise to deliver success for your customers, enabling everyone to be able to work on the behalf of your customer, whether that's empowering people who are on the customer-facing teams or the teams that support them. And to do that, it means allowing them to have access to customer information and then allowing them to participate and impact customer success. And then building the right teams with the right skills and the right culture, having that right mindset for your employees. How do you ensure that employees are focused on the right thing, that you're a purpose-driven organization culture that puts customers at the center of all? That's all important. There's more to these, but these are just a few of the best practice capabilities that's essential for your organization to deliver on success. Because ultimately, we all want to create the right outcomes for our business, and we want to create the right outcomes for our customers. And we want to do it with greater frequency and greater consistency. So I'm now going to hand it over to Kevin, who is going to share with you some of the specifics of what it takes to create that measurement system and management system for success.
All right, thanks, Anne, and hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. So in order to realize your vision of customer success, being your customer-centered growth strategy and getting to realize all of the lifetime value benefits that go along with that, you must have a measurement system design. And as part of that, you'll not only want to focus on the outcomes that you ultimately want to produce, but also on the things that create those outcomes. So those are going to be categories that span outcomes for your business and also outcomes for your customers. And so ultimately what we want to create is a virtuous cycle where all of the actions and work that are being done produce even more of the ultimate outcomes that we want. So again, those being great outcomes for your customers and great outcomes for your business. So in a general sense, what you likely have, whether you've documented it or not, some version of a buyer's journey or some new acquisition journey that your customers go through. So everything from being aware that they have a need to doing the research, ultimately making a decision, and then some sort of a purchase event. And so what follows that would be the cycle where you might go through an implementation or an onboarding process to deliver on some initial value. You probably have either deployed or are deploying a proactive process that would allow you to drive adoption or consumption of your products or services. And probably a series of well-designed continuous value delivery mechanisms that put a customer on a proven path to success, but also deal with any problem or challenge situations that might occur along the way. And then to fuel that growth, ultimately aiming to create pull for new use cases or organic growth or access to some new user population that can fuel some of these expansions for your business, which would be buying more, renewing at high rates, becoming advocates or references. And then certainly depending on the product or service offering that you might have, those business outcomes for customers are going to vary by your business model. And so when we look forward on how do you leverage a measurement system to create a supply chain or some sort of virtuous cycle for those business outcomes that you want, ultimately focusing on the things that produce those outcomes becomes really important. And so let's step through some of those categories. The first three here are essentially leading indicators for some of those ultimate outcomes that you'd want to produce. And so it would start with employees. And so do you have employees that are engaged, inspired, and committed to delivering not only the experience that you want, but to do the work that's required to produce those outcomes for customers in your business? So that's one category. Another would be looking at the actual activities and actions that are being performed. So are you taking the right actions at the right time with the right customers? And do you have that the visibility in place to do that? In this next category around positive customer touch points, episodes, in the overall journey that they would go through. So there's a whole variety of experiences that get delivered. Some of those are very specific in nature, that at a touch point level. Others for episodes, might be combinations or sequences that a customer logically goes through in interacting with your company, and those are cases where it might actually span some different functions in your company, and then of course ultimately the entire journey, and making sure that you have a measurement system that can look across that all the way from the time that a customer becomes a customer through their entire journey with you. The next category would be some of these outcome areas, and so certainly looking at relationship and loyalty would be one area in the category of advocacy. But also these business outcomes for your customers and your company, which again are going to vary. So let's unpack that just a little bit so that there's a little bit greater clarity on some example metric categories that would be mapped to those parts of the measurement system. So in the case of employee experience, generally what we see are there's many employee surveys that are out there. Sometimes they're basic, where might be just as simple as asking something as similar as an employee NPS question. Other times, there might be an index of questions that has been established that arrive at an engagement score, or there might be an inspiration survey approach that's being applied. And so ultimately, making sure that your employees that are engaged in and building and delivering that experience and the value to your customers, that they're committed, engaged, and inspired to do that work is important to measure and look at. This next category around the right actions at the right time for the right customer. So you likely have some design that's either proactive or reactive in nature, and we'll touch on that just briefly in a moment. But is that process being followed? You likely established it for a good reason to produce the results that you ultimately want, and making sure that that work is actually being done, that the right accountability process is in place for specific roles. Things like reference invitations or those going out at specific points in time to the right customers. You might be capturing things like customer loyalty levels, and so at the time that a customer is telling you, that they're likely to recommend, are you actually engaging them, to do that sort of work, which could vary in nature. Account plans are another example where planning out the moment. It might be a start of the year activity. It might be at a certain engagement point. It might be something that happens post onboarding, but our team's doing that activity. And then even looking at the kind of employee experience version of an assessment. What I mean by that is your frontline employees in particular are at a place where they can see how customers are experiencing your product or service. And they also can see whether or not there's some need that's not being met. And so employees are a really good judge of basically being able to assess those situations and provide really great feedback, whether it's to address a systemic area or to address a specific customer situation. And so leveraging them as part of that process can be very powerful. This next category around positive customer touchpoints episodes and the journey. So just a few examples, and I think there certainly could be many here. And in the span of a brief call, we're not going to be able to unpack every individual metric or KPI, but certainly looking at CSAT levels. If it's a situation where they're engaging with the support function, mean time to resolution on problems, escalations that might be coming up in specific parts of that customer journey, and then also looking at the life cycle stages that you've established, whether it's onboarding or adoption, some ongoing engagement, and what feedback loops can you establish through a measurement system to see how you're doing there. The other two categories around customer relationship and loyalty, and then business outcomes for your customers and company. So these are things where you're going to be looking for what were things that actually took place, results that were delivered. And so in the relationship and loyalty, it could be, are they actually not only willing to be a reference and they've signed up to do that, but are they actually doing reference calls for you? Are they active? Are they showing up and speaking at maybe corporate events that you're holding? Are they utilizing and consuming your products and services? In addition to things like an NPS or an effort score, and things like likelihood to renew responses. In the business outcomes for your customers and your company, outcomes for customers are going to vary. There's a whole variety of business focuses that companies have. Ultimately, I think if you can establish what value are you seeking to produce and provide to a customer, and does that meet their expectation, or are they realizing that is what you'd be after. And again, employees are really great ways to tap into that capability, especially those frontline teams that are working with accounts. They'll know the answer answer to that in all likelihood. And then, of course, the business outcomes for your company, which just some examples here. Again, the individual metrics and KPIs, I think, can be broad and diverse, but renewals and then expansion or upsell, overall revenue growth, adoption levels, some of the stages like onboarding success. So coming out of that, are you progressing through those stages in the time that you'd expect? And so ultimately, what we'd be aiming to do is turn all these great intentions of producing these outcomes into very specific actions. And those will generally fall into two categories. One will be these proactive processes where you ultimately want to establish what is the proven path to success. So what things must happen and be true for your customer to get that great outcome that you're promising to them during some selling cycle. And then what are those great outcomes for your business that you want to establish? And if you can have that process and put the right guardrails in place so your execution delivers that, you can not only determine what must happen and be true for those outcomes to be produced for customers in your company, but you'll know who should be doing those things, and you can establish, are they actually happening? And once you can do that and determine how do you actually know where those things happening at the right times, those are your opportunities to drop in components of this measurement system. And so the same thing is true for your reactive process. So when you can identify when something adverse happens and look back and say, how might I have detected that? And can I classify it so that it's something very specific and I can match up some resolution type to solve that particular problem. So when it occurs again, you can see the problem happening, detect it, you know exactly what type of problem is, and you know what solves that problem. Again, if those things are happening and you can identify when you would know that, then obviously those are other great opportunities to measure those specific categories. So many companies will roll, many of these measures into health score or some health indicator measure, and so oftentimes these 5 areas are things that we see quite often. So there's things that are in a usage category. So is the customer using your product or service? How often? Utilization. So are they fully utilizing what they purchased? Certainly business outcomes, so are they getting the expected results and value that they expected when they purchased? And that's something that might change over the course of time as well. And then engagement, so that can certainly be at a product level. Are they logging in, using things like key features, using it in the way that would maximize the benefit or the return. And then feedback, and that can certainly be customer sentiment. It can also come from various operational data points that you can incorporate together. So it's not only voice of customer, survey feedback, but certainly you can see an awful lot happening through operational data as well. And so when you think about just this collective delivery, if you can picture it as a collection of these value streams that have very specific activities and a process, some KPI, and as part of an overall management system, you can create this supply chain, that will help not only make sure that there's efficient operations, but that you can create this virtuous cycle and path to deliver outcomes for customers in your company. And as part of that, I wanted to also just introduce the idea of there's got to be some surrounding management system that goes along with this. So just having the metrics is not going to be enough. You likely are going to need some review cadence, a way for people to come together to see the results that are being produced. And determine, is this actually what we expected, what's necessary to meet our goals. And so, just to suggest a framework, Looking at just the moment in time results may not be sufficient to ultimately create this learning system and continuous improvement model. So you likely are going to want to rotate specific focus areas with a retrospective and look back. Do some deep dives on maybe a product line or a business division, and also rotate through the moment in time views with what's happening next quarter or next year, and what does that outlook and plan look like, and even go beyond that to having maybe it's towards the end of a quarterly period, which this is just an illustration of, to have a close plan for maybe the in quarter execution or the end of year wrap up, and all of that should just fuel some ongoing baseline for what's going to be required next quarter, next year, in order to continue to meet goals. And so at Totango, we always start with those goals in mind. And so we've got a methodology that's inherent in our Spark product and capability that incorporates all these goals together with what's required to produce them in the form of a success block. And so whether that goal be onboarding or churn or renewals, it might be escalation or any key process that's going to be part of those customer-centered goals, there can be a range of focus areas. And so in this case, in onboarding, if you set out with wanting to consistently meet implementation timelines, there could be a number of specific metrics. There might be another goal related to onboarding that might be to deliver consistently this great experience for new customers, again with measurements on satisfaction or survey information, and matching that process up and looking at what actions produce those results, measure those things so that you have this supply chain for your desired results and for growth in your company is what we'd encourage to build out for your measurement system. And so with that, I'll turn it back to Anne.
Great, thank you. So I hope this webinar has been informative for you as you think about the right metrics and measurement system for your organization. Please feel free to enter your questions in the Q&A. I see that we've got several going in already. So we're going to get to that right now shortly. But before we get to that, we do want to make sure that as we continue to deliver content and best practices for you, that they're topics that address your needs. So here's just a few that we have put in place to think about, not in any particular order. If you can take a few seconds just to fill out this poll and let us know which ones are of interest for you so that we can make sure that we'll show that in the future. Whether it's building your business case, focusing on the orchestration model, as Kevin had talked about, to take those metrics and create the cadence, the ability to actually act to them, curating some of those positive experiences from sentiment and experience, scaling using automation, building your team, the education, the management team meetings as needed, or bridging your gap between product sales for organizational alignment, and then lastly, partner success. So if you would go ahead and just spend a few seconds just to fill that out. And at the same time, we will take a look at some of the questions and I'll get to that very quickly.
And it's going to be really helpful to prioritize what's next in terms of the webinar series. So thank you in advance for responding to those.
While we're filling that out, we can start answering some of the questions that have come in. So it looks like there's been several questions actually just around integration with tools and whether Totango will allow for integrations with things like Jira and Asana and SurveyMonkey and Qualtrics and some of the other experience management systems in order to be able to pull in the data, as we talked about, to create those insights. And the answer to that is yes. Totango specifically does connect all the dots for all the data that you have. Example, enterprises that we have pull in data from utilization systems, from sentiment and experience management systems, from support systems. One enterprise that we have pulls in 40 such data on a daily streams of data on a daily basis, things as simple as Excel spreadsheets to very complex ERP systems. So we do gather those, bring them all into one location, one place, and on top of that, pull out kind of the insights actually from that data, because if just consuming the data is one thing, but be able to pull out the insights and then be able to act on that intelligence is what Totango systems focused on. Looks like we have a question here just around your recommendations regarding sharing, how you would share metrics on customer success with the rest of the organization.
Yeah, so I think it's valuable to have, for things that are going to be important for overall company performance, to have some level of alignment in metrics so that you can produce those outcomes and results. And so what I mean by that is it's rare that one function alone can probably produce something like growth. Of course, there's going to be some aspects that relate to the product. There's going to be some aspects that relate to deal process, whether that's a renewal or some expansion event, et cetera, services, et cetera. And so while some of those aligned goals are important, I think it's also important that some specific things get called out to either roles or functions. And so I would just say that yes, alignment. There might be some top level outcome goal that's actually shared in, across the entire company or specific groups. But when it comes to the work and how do individual roles participate, I think you also need to pay very close attention to those actions, and are people doing the work that's expected and required to generate those results. So I wouldn't say it's exclusive, but certainly I think there's an opportunity to have goal alignment. All right, so we have some more here. How does your organization value leverage qualitative data points to get deeper insight into CX and CS? So I think, so basically, in addition to a lot of quantitative data points, how do you leverage any qualitative information? So I think number one, if the context here, it looks like there might be a customer experience lens also. You might have a wealth of like text analytic information that's accessible. You might have customer verbatims that provide a lot of detail on specific experiences that can help when you're doing closed loop follow-up, a closed loop follow-up process. And so if your CS team is actively participating in that, that's going to be one area. The other would be when you think of frontline teams in general, whether that's a customer success team or it could be a support team, there's great line of sight into what the experience actually is. If you're that person that sat in the meeting and heard firsthand what the customer experience was, or if you were in a support team and you actually took the support call, you're in a great position to not only see what the customer challenge was, hear the firsthand accounting of it, but you can probably see how is it that actually materialized, happened, and if there's a limitation that might exist in your company, what that actually is. And so from a problem-solving perspective, that's a really powerful position and vantage point to have. And certainly to capture that, in Totango as a customer success platform, you can then take action on it. So that person can certainly record, their interpretation of that sentiment without having survey data or something like that. And I think that gives you a lot of acceleration in your ability to be responsive, and not only look at information coming in, but take immediate action on it. All right.
I think given the time that we have, unfortunately, we are out of time right now. There's been several questions that have definitely come in, and we will make sure to answer all of these questions via email or in a follow-up webinar that we will be having. So thank you for your participation. I hope this has been valuable. This webinar has been recorded and will be available to you, and we'll send a link in the next 24 hours so that you have that. If there's any questions that we have not answered and you would like to, there is a survey form that will be sent out at the close of this webinar, and you can fill that in as well. And please do, so we know how else we can best serve you and help you. Thank you again. And we hope to speak to you and see you again at the next webinar.
All right. Thanks, everyone.